Hey everybody, this is Dr. William Clark here for the Dr. William Clark podcast. Glad to be with you for another episode and so happy that you're tuning in for this particular podcast. And I figured I'd come on. There is a hot conversation going on right now on social media. And I wanted to just talk about it for a few minutes. Here's a question that's percolating right now, and it says, "Why do churches struggle with establishing the right funding sources?" And there are a number of people who have chimed in here. Let me just jump into the comments here. Some are saying, few people. This person saying that pastors fill their pockets first. They don't file taxes. And so that kind of presents an issue. Let's see here. Others say funders do not give to faith-based organizations. Others are saying some pastors do not know how to ask. Others saying attendance is dropping. And this other person says that financial reports are not up to date. So let me quickly respond to this and kind of like address this, because I think a lot of you who are of the faith-based community or advising the faith-based community may have the same question. And the question again is, why do churches struggle with establishing the right grant funding sources? So here's what I am going to share with you. There are a couple things that come to mind, right? I have seen that there are a lot of churches who fear taking secular money. And if you talk to really good pastors who care about their group or their congregation, rather, they care about their community, etc., they fear connecting secular money with sacred money, and they don't want to be, quote, owned by a organization, primarily a funder. And so that fear creates this dissension internally with a pastoral leader or a group of faith-based leaders, a fear to receive money of that kind. And I think that fear, I'm not going to say it is unfounded, but what I will say and this attaches to all the comments I'm going to say about this particular question, it really depends on your strategic intent. And you, as a faith-based leader taking nonprofit or foundation money, must understand the strategic intent. And this is no different from understanding the strategic intent of taking individual donations from parishioners, donations from outside groups, donations from any other group who decides to pour resources into your church. The second thing I'll share is what is true is that there are churches that have poor business practices, particularly churches that are smaller, churches that are family-based churches. It's just a thing, right? And a lot of it is because we've always been small. We're going to be small, and we barely raise enough to pay the rent. Or if we paid off a building or have it, kind of debt free, we can't afford to put our pastor on a salary, so we're going to give him or her a stipend. And that stipend may take up a large chunk of the revenue just because the stipend even still isn't a livable wage for the pastor. And so as a result of that creates this onslaught and downstream of bad business practices. Whereas I'm not saying that the pastor shouldn't receive a stipend. That is not what I'm saying at all. But what I will say is that that type of practice can lead to bad budgetary outcomes, right? So we give the pastor X percentage of income coming in because no matter what we raise, even if we give it all to him or her, it is not a livable wage. What ends up happening is there becomes a gap in resources where there isn't enough money to pay the bills, the light bill, the tax bill, trash bill, whatever bill that comes up. And so churches end up, get this, having chicken dinner sales or any type of Girl Scout cookie sale or car wash sale to raise money to pay for things that pop up. Roof has a leak in it. Now we got to do a fundraiser. So-and-so passed away and they don't have life insurance. Now we got to sell chicken dinners. We want to host an event. Now we got to have a concert, right, and sell tickets. And the truth of the matter is, one, I recommend you go back and read and listen to my podcast about chicken dinners. Search for that. But what the truth is, those fundraisers do not yield credible profit margins for anyone. Because when the church gets done kicking in the upfront cost of the chicken dinner platter, meaning pounds of meat and sides and utensils and containers, when you clear out the books and you look at what's left, there is literally a profit margin of less than 1%, and that's probably me being generous. Then the question you got to ask yourself is, what was the point? Let's say you have members kick in funds to upfront the cost of the chicken dinner. At the end of the day, members who do that, one, they're wearing out their resources. Two, they may themselves be part of the committee that cooks the food, which wears them out. Three, whatever they give just might be their tithe for the Sunday that's coming up, right? Which means that the church is going to lose on multiple fronts. And it's still, when you do the math, the profit margin doesn't make any sense whatsoever. This ties into bad business practices and all that good stuff. The third thing I'll share is pastors have no sense of how to develop strategic partnerships. Now, pastors know how to operate politically within the church realm, within their church organization, etc., but they struggle to operate strategically outside of the four walls of the church. They struggle to know how to master relationships with secular folks or people who have professional jobs. They don't know how to ask for resources, don't even know how to ask for money. They don't know how to offer something in exchange, because a relationship requires a give and a take. A strategic relationship is going to require you to not only give and take, but try to leverage up because the church resources aren't as great. And that can create an issue when the church and its leaders do not know how to integrate, don't know how to connect with, they don't know how to communicate with people that have greater resources. I'll leave these two thoughts here. And if you look at just the podcast history, you'll hear some of the stuff. But here's two thoughts, right? One of my favorite biblical stories is the story of Joseph. He arose as the boy who had the coat of many colors, thrown in the pit by his brothers, accused of rape, sold to Potiphar's house, accused of rape, then put in prison, then rose to the governor of Egypt. He was a man of faith. He was a man of faith. And because of his faith and ability to interpret dreams and his strategic business mind, he was able to combine all that to save the world, according to biblical scripture, from a famine. Okay, he arose, he figured out how to strategically position himself, used his gifts, used his historical experiences, got better at it, saved the world from a pandemic. Second story I'll share with you. Luke chapter 16, Jesus teaches a story about the manager that gets fired from his job. And the conclusion of it all is this manager who got fired from his job was still commended by his boss who fired him. Now, how many of you have been fired and got a letter of recommendation from the same boss that fired you? It does not happen. And yet it happened in this case. And it is because Jesus quoted this particular manager as calling the fired worker shrewd. If you want to know the story about that, go read Luke 16. I believe it's the first 12 or 15 verses or so, give or take. Read it, right? And this is for the pastors, the leaders, the faith-based leaders who are out here trying to do their best, particularly during this corona moment, this pandemic moment, which is not going to be the last. Just heard a news report reminding us that we have always had governmental failures. If you think back, we had it with 9/11. We had it with Katrina. We had it with the financial crisis, so on and so on and so on. Crises are going to pop up. It's going to impact our community disproportionately. What is the church going to do? What can the church do to leverage resources? There's so much to say, so much to do, but I'm going to keep this podcast short, and I'm going to whet your appetite to go back, look at the archives, but also join in the conversation in the comments. Like, subscribe, share this podcast, start a conversation about this podcast. I would love to interact with you guys about this topic. This is Dr. William Clark for the Dr. William Clark Podcast. We'll see you in the next episode. Peace.